I'm Olivia Jensen, 29 years old, and the apartment I spent 5 years painstakingly saving for has suddenly become the center of a family conflict. During our regular monthly dinner, my parents casually dropped the bombshell: "Your sister will be living in your apartment," treating the place I worked so hard for like it belonged to everyone. While I quietly nodded and took a sip of my wine, inside I was screaming. The look in my mother's eyes made it clear this wasn't a question, and my sister's entitled grin said everything I needed to know. Before I get into how this family ambush went down and what I did afterward, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe if you've ever dealt with family who treat your boundaries like polite suggestions. Growing up as the middle child in the Jensen family meant living in the shadow of impossible standards and expectations that seemed to apply differently to each of us. Graduating college first was a big deal to me, but to my parents, it barely registered. They saw my degree as the bare minimum, not the massive achievement it was for someone juggling 3 jobs and keeping a full scholarship. My downtown Portland apartment wasn't just 4 walls with exposed brick and morning sunlight warming the hardwood floors. It symbolized every extra shift I took at the campus coffee shop, every tutoring session squeezed between classes, and every dollar saved instead of spending weekends away with friends. Signing that lease 2 years ago finally gave me something that was completely mine, something real representing my independence from a family dynamic that always left me gasping for breath and recognition. My older sister, Rachel, was always the golden child, the artist whose talents were celebrated with gallery shows paid for by my parents, while my own academic wins were met with a polite, "That's nice." Over dinner, Rachel floated in and out of our parents' house like it had revolving doors, always returning after a failed relationship or a career setback that was never her fault. She showed up with suitcases full of designer clothes, charged to our parents' credit card, crying about how unfair life was to her, and they'd comfort her with spare keys to their vacation home or a new car to help her get back on her feet. Meanwhile, I drove the same used Honda Civic I bought in college, carefully maintained because I knew there'd be no replacement if it broke down. My younger brother Ethan was the baby of the family, constantly excused from responsibility while he explored a rotating list of hobbies and half-finished online courses, all funded unquestioningly by my parents. The three of us lived in completely different worlds within the same family, with wildly different expectations and support, and I was always stuck in the middle, expected to be fiercely independent, yet endlessly accommodating. It wasn't new for my parents to make decisions affecting me without even asking. When I was 16, they volunteered me to babysit my cousin's kids every weekend for a whole summer, telling me only after they'd already committed. During college, they gave my off-campus apartment address to distant relatives who needed a place to crash during a family wedding, calling me on the morning of their arrival to let me know every time I tried to set boundaries. I was branded selfish and reminded of family duties that somehow never applied to my siblings. But the last year was different. I finally found solid ground in my career as an environmental consultant, earning respect and recognition, independent of my family's approval. I started therapy that taught me setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was crucial for my mental health. I even successfully said no to hosting Thanksgiving, breaking a tradition that had always left me drained and unappreciated. These small wins made me feel like I was finally steering my relationship with my family, proving I was an adult with choices, not just a people pleaser. The monthly dinners stayed my nod to tradition, a controlled setting where I could stay connected without losing too much of myself. I had no idea that this particular Sunday dinner would push every boundary I'd fought to set and force me to decide if I was ready to stand up for myself, even if it meant standing alone against my family's united front. The smell of my mom's famous pot roast filled the house as I arrived precisely 10 minutes late. A tiny rebellion I allowed myself each month. Dad greeted me with his usual brisk hug and immediate commentary on Portland traffic, as if my delay was a personal insult rather than a deliberate choice. Rachel was already there, lounging on the living room sofa with a glass of wine, her designer boots resting on our mother's antique coffee table, something I'd never be allowed. Ethan showed up 20 minutes later, greeted warmly with smiles and a cozy, "We were about to start without you." From Mom, dinner kicked off on its usual track, Dad dominating the conversation with opinions on politics and business, while Mom asked questions about everyone's week that really just led to neighborhood gossip. I was halfway through my carefully rehearsed, sanitized work update when Dad cleared his throat. The family's universal cue that the real agenda was about to begin. "Rachel has some news," he announced, sounding like he was introducing a presidential address. My sister glanced up from her phone, which she'd been scrolling beneath the table, shifting from boredom to rehearsed vulnerability. "Jason and I broke up," she said, naming her boyfriend of 8 months, who I'd met once at a family barbecue where he mostly talked about his cryptocurrency investments. "He's being totally unreasonable about the apartment lease, saying I need to keep paying even though I'm moving out." Mom reached across the table, squeezing Rachel's hand with sympathy. "It's just not right. She shouldn't have to deal with this stress on top of a broken heart." I gave the automatic sisterly nod, while mentally figuring out how soon I could make my escape. Dad continued, cutting into his roast beef with surgical precision. "So, we've worked it all out. Rachel will move into your place while she gets back on her feet." The way he casually dropped this bombshell made it hit even harder, like he was announcing a change to dinner plans rather than invading my personal space. Mom smiled brightly, already moving on to logistics. It all seemed perfectly reasonable to them. They pointed out that my apartment had that extra room I used as an office, and reminded me how I often worked late at the office anyway. Rachel just needed a few months to get back on her feet and find her own place. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the physical sign that my boundaries were being bulldozed again. Carefully, I responded, "I actually use my office," choosing my words with care. "I've been taking on freelance projects that require a dedicated workspace." My sister just rolled her eyes, not even trying to hide how little she cared. "You can work at the kitchen table. I did that through college." Of course, they conveniently left out that her college years were spent earning an art degree, fully paid for by our parents, stretched over 5.5 years with multiple breaks for her mental health. "Ah, it's just temporary," my father added, sounding final, like that should end any debate. Family helps family. My mother was already scrolling through her calendar on her phone. "We can help move her stuff next Saturday. Your building has visitor parking, right?" I watched as they enthusiastically planned the takeover of my personal sanctuary, the very space I'd built for myself, with the same excitement they once had, organizing Rachel's 16th birthday party, all while forgetting my own 18th. Across the table, my brother caught my eye for a brief moment before quickly looking away, clearly not wanting to get involved in a fight that didn't directly concern him. I found myself at a crossroads. Speak up and face my family's collective disapproval, or stay quiet and surrender my boundaries yet again. But this time, something was different inside me. Instead of the usual anxious need to please, I felt a quiet clarity. "I'll need to check my lease about long-term guests," I said, keeping my tone neutral, neither agreeing nor refusing outright. "Of course, of course." My mother waved off my concern. "That's just a formality. They can't stop you from helping your sister." I nodded again, letting them think I was on board, while secretly crafting a very different plan in my head. The conversation shifted to the practicalities of Rachel's move, with no one asking if I'd made plans for the weekend they'd commandeered, or considered how this might affect me. I gave minimal responses, letting them mistake my silence for agreement instead of a strategic retreat. As I helped clear the dishes after dessert, mentally mapping out my response, I realized I'd reached a point where simply giving in was no longer something I could accept. Driving home from my parents' house had never felt so freeing before. My car became a transitional space where the daughter they knew faded away and was replaced by a woman finally ready to take control. Sitting in my car outside my apartment, I turned off the engine but didn't rush to get out. The usual emotional hangover after family dinners was settling in, but this time it was mixed with something new, a blend of righteous anger and crystal clear clarity. I replayed the dinner conversation in my mind, hearing my parents assign my sister to my home without ever genuinely asking how I felt or what I thought. The pattern was so painfully obvious, I could almost laugh at how predictable it had become. My needs always came last. My space and time treated like shared resources, while my siblings were excused. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my objections just to keep the peace, how all those little concessions had piled up into an unspoken rule that I'd always bend. Not this time, I whispered to my reflection in the rearview mirror, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and walked through every room with fresh eyes, appreciating the sanctuary I'd built for myself. The office they so casually suggested I give up wasn't just a workspace. It was the physical symbol of the dreams I was still building, projects that mattered deeply to me. No matter if my family understood their worth, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, letting determination replace the usual resignation I felt after these family encounters. First, I carefully reviewed my lease agreement, confirming what I'd suspected. Subletting without management's approval was forbidden, and guests staying longer than 2 weeks had to be added to the lease, complete with background and credit checks. Instead of seeing these rules as obstacles, I recognized them as the structure I could use to protect myself. Next, I called my friend Megan, who had watched my boundaries slowly erode over the years. "They did what?" she exclaimed when I explained everything. "No way, Liv! You can't let this happen again." Her outrage was validating in a way I rarely experienced, her outsider perspective confirming that my family's behavior was neither normal nor acceptable. "I'm not going to," I said, surprised at the firmness in my own voice. "I just need to figure out how to handle this without causing a total family meltdown." We brainstormed options, quickly discarding direct confrontation, since that had never worked. My family was experts at overwhelming opposition with sheer persistence and guilt trips, so this called for strategy over argument, action over conflict. "What if you just weren't there?" Megan suggested. "What if, when they show up with Rachel's stuff, you're simply unavailable?" The idea stuck immediately. I had vacation days saved up and a work conference in Seattle next month. I could possibly move ahead. My mind raced with possibilities, not just to avoid the immediate battle, but to set a precedent that would reshape my family dynamics for good. After hanging up with Megan, I dove deeper into tenant rights, taking detailed notes on the legal protections around my living situation. I emailed my building manager with questions about visitor policies and security measures, phrasing it casually to avoid raising suspicion. By midnight, my initial anxiety had transformed into careful planning. I drafted a document outlining every step I needed to secure my space and my boundaries, adjusting my schedule, mapping out communications, considering legal angles, and creating backup plans. I thought about who might temporarily stay in my apartment while I was gone. Someone whose presence would make it impossible for my sister to just move in. Derek, a responsible and professional colleague who'd recently mentioned needing a place during condo repairs, came to mind. He was unknown to my family, which made him the perfect temporary tenant. The last piece fell into place when I realized I could set up a legitimate short-term sublease for Derek, documenting everything in a way that would stand up against my family's inevitable attempts to get around it. As I finally settled into bed, a wave of exhaustion mixed with a new sense of strength washed over me. For maybe the first time, I wasn't lying awake rehearsing excuses or apologies for standing up for myself. Instead, my mind was focused on crafting a solution that would force my family to recognize me as an adult with rights they couldn't override, no matter their expectations or sense of entitlement. I knew the road ahead would be uncomfortable and possibly painful, but as sleep began to claim me, I felt certain that facing confrontation head-on would be far easier than slowly suffocating by giving up my independence again. The week after that family dinner unfolded with deliberate care as I set each part of my plan into motion. Monday morning started with a visit to my building's management office, where I met Tanya, the property manager who had approved my lease 2 years ago. I carefully explained, "I'm thinking about having a friend stay while I'm away for work." Keeping the situation neutral, I just wanted to understand all the policies about guests and temporary residents. Tanya handed me the visitor guidelines and sublease paperwork, explaining that anyone staying more than 14 days needed management's approval, plus a background check. I nodded, pretending casual interest, while internally noting how these rules directly contradicted my family's assumptions. And just to be clear, I asked, if someone tried to move in without this paperwork? Tanya was firm. Absolutely not allowed. Security won't let them in without authorization. We take that very seriously. It's about safety and complying with occupancy laws. Armed with that clarity, I messaged my colleague Derek at lunch, carefully describing the situation in professional terms and leaving out the messy family details. I need someone responsible in my apartment while I'm away for 2 weeks. There'll be a formal sublease to protect us both. Would you be interested? Derek replied within the hour, grateful for the timing given his condo repairs. We set up a meeting for Wednesday after work to finalize everything Tuesday evening. I got a text from Rachel. Mom says I should check with you about what furniture to bring. I think my bedroom set would look better in your spare room than whatever you have there. The entitled tone confirmed I was on the right track. I crafted a deliberately vague reply. I'm sorting some logistics about the apartment. Let's touch base next week. It bought me time without revealing anything. Wednesday went as planned. I showed Derek around my apartment and explained the temporary setup. We signed the sublease agreement and sent a copy to building management to make it official. I added hesitantly, one thing, my family doesn't know about this, and they might show up expecting me to be here. If they do, you're not obligated to let them in or explain anything beyond that you're the legal occupant. Derek, familiar with his own family drama after a divorce, nodded understandingly. I can handle that, just the facts. No drama. That evening, I booked my work trip to coincide with my family's planned move-in day for Rachel, reserving a hotel in a nearby coastal town where I could decompress but stay reachable if necessary. Thursday morning, I requested remote work accommodations from my company, citing personal reasons that required temporary relocation. With work secured, I began prepping my apartment, moving important documents and irreplaceable items to a small storage unit I'd rented. For the month, I meticulously documented my apartment's condition, with photos of every room to compare when I returned. By Friday, my mother had called twice, asking about parking access and if I could clear some bookshelf space for Rachel's things. I replied briefly, explaining I was swamped with deadlines, but would sort everything out before the weekend. I deliberately projected busy compliance while finalizing my counterplan Saturday. I installed a small security camera in my living room, aimed at the entryway, a legal precaution I never imagined needing against my own family. I gave Derek keys, the building access code, and written authorization for security. That evening, my father texted, "We'll arrive around 11 a.m. Saturday. Have the parking pass ready and clear space in your closet for Rachel's winter clothes." The commanding tone, absent any questions or regard for my schedule, only strengthened my resolve. Sunday morning, I met Derek for a final walkthrough, making sure he understood the arrangement's boundaries, and gave him emergency contacts, intentionally excluding my immediate family. As I packed for my trip, a calm determination settled over me. My phone buzzed with a last text from my mother. "Rachel's so excited about her fresh start at your place. This will bring you girls closer together." I left it unanswered, recognizing it as another attempt to frame their takeover as a gift I should appreciate. By Sunday night, everything was ready. I'd reclaimed my power, not with confrontation, but through careful planning and standing up for my rights. Setting my phone to silent, except for work and Derek, I braced for the inevitable storm when my family's expectations collided with the reality I'd created. The boundaries I'd drawn on paper were about to be tested in real life, and for once, I felt ready to hold my ground against the family pressure that had always swept me away. Before the days leading up to their planned invasion brought a steady stream of one-sided messages that confirmed I'd made the right call. Monday morning started with a text from Rachel. "I'm donating your guest room furniture to make space for my bedroom set. Hope that's cool." No question mark, no real permission asked, just a declaration of decisions made about my belongings. I didn't respond right away, letting the assumption hang in the air as I focused on preparing for my absence. By lunchtime, my mother had already called twice, leaving voicemails about paint colors Rachel was considering for her new room and asking if I could take down the gloomy photographs from my hallway to make space for Rachel's framed concert posters. Their casual dismissal of my carefully chosen decor, each piece holding memories and meaning for me, stung deeply, but only strengthened my resolve. That Tuesday evening, my father called, his voice mixing authority with a fake concern. "Your mother says you haven't responded to her texts about Rachel's move. Is there something we need to talk about?" It wasn't a genuine invitation to discuss, but a thinly veiled demand to fall in line with their plans. I replied, "I've been swamped with work, just wrapping up some projects before the weekend." His grunt of satisfaction told me he'd taken my words as compliance. Exactly what I intended. Things escalated Wednesday when Rachel sent a group text to our family, announcing she'd given notice on her apartment and scheduled movers for Saturday. "So excited for sister bonding time," she wrote, tagging me with heart emojis that felt more like a territorial claim than affection. Mom jumped in with plans for a moving day lunch to be delivered to my apartment, while Dad arranged borrowing a colleague's truck for the big furniture. All of this happened without my input, a stream of decisions and plans flowing past, as if my presence didn't matter, but my agreement was assumed. That evening, I met Megan for dinner, my last chance to see her before the final stage of my plan kicked off. "They're really doing this, huh?" she asked, scrolling through the screenshots of family messages I'd shown her. "They're absolutely certain you'll just roll over and let them take over your space." I nodded, picking at my food, the looming confrontation settling in my stomach, like a heavy stone. I know it's the right thing to do, but I still feel guilty, like I'm being selfish or mean for not helping Rachel. Megan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Liv, listen to me. Setting boundaries isn't mean, expecting respect isn't selfish. They're the ones crossing lines here, not you." Her words felt like a lifeline, reinforcing the truth I was still struggling to fully accept. Thursday brought the most audacious move, yet when Mom forwarded me an email confirmation for a furniture delivery scheduled for Monday. After the move, Rachel found the perfect desk for her creative projects. "Don't worry about the cost. It's our housewarming gift." The sheer entitlement of arranging deliveries to my home without even asking infuriated me so much, it nearly overwhelmed my anxiety. I forwarded the confirmation to Derek, with a quick note telling him to refuse any deliveries for Rachel, then blocked Mom's email on my work account to avoid further distractions. Friday, the day before their arrival, my phone buzzed nonstop. Dad called 3 times during my morning meetings, each voicemail growing more irritated. "We need the visitor parking code." The first said, "Call your mother about parking?" The second demanded. By the third, his patience was gone. "Olivia, this is ridiculous. Call us immediately about tomorrow." Mom sent messages alternating between guilt trips about Rachel's fragile feelings after the breakup and passive-aggressive reminders of family duties. "Your sister would do this for you," she texted, conveniently forgetting how I'd needed emergency housing after a pipe burst in my first apartment, and Rachel had claimed the spare room for art storage. By early evening, I'd packed for the weekend and finalized plans with Derek, who would move in. That night, I sent an out-of-office reply citing a work emergency requiring travel, vague but official sounding. Just as I was leaving, my phone lit up with one last message from Dad. "We'll be at your building at 11 a.m. Sharp. Rachel's entire apartment is packed and ready. Don't make this difficult." The commanding tone, so familiar yet clearly inappropriate now, solidified my choice. I took a last look around my quiet apartment, the calm before the storm. For the first time in my adult life, I was putting my boundaries ahead of family expectations. Despite the anxiety swirling in my stomach, a new feeling bloomed inside me. Self-respect, locking the door and handing Derek the keys in the hallway, I let myself admit a painful truth. Setting healthy boundaries with family can feel like betrayal, because they've trained you to betray yourself instead. The real test would come tomorrow, when they expected compliance. But instead, faced the reality I had built. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear, the perfect kind of northwest autumn day that usually energized me. I woke in my hotel room just 30 minutes from my apartment, feeling a mix of nervous anticipation and surprising calm about finally enforcing my boundary. My phone, left on Do Not Disturb overnight, showed 5 missed calls from Mom starting at 7:30 a.m., 3 from Dad, and a stream of frantic texts from Rachel. The first message at 9:15 cheerfully announced, "Dad borrowed Uncle Steve's truck for my dresser. So excited!" By 10:30, the tone had shifted. "Where are you? We need the parking pass." Then at 10:45, "Call Mom now, we're almost there." I quickly texted Derek to confirm my family was en route. His calm reply reassured me. "Got it. Everything's under control here." I silenced my phone again and ordered room service breakfast, determined to protect my mental space during what I knew would be a tough few hours. At exactly 11:03 a.m., my security app pinged with motion at my apartment door. Opening the live feed, I saw my parents and Rachel standing in the hallway outside my unit. Dad was pounding on the door with growing force, while Mom repeatedly rang the doorbell. Rachel paced behind them, animatedly gesturing as she talked on her phone, presumably trying to reach me. After several minutes of unanswered knocking, Dad pulled out his phone and seemed to call building management. I pictured the upcoming conversation with the weekend security staff, explaining firmly that no, they couldn't grant access to anyone not on the lease. Family ties aside, the security footage showed my family retreating for a moment, probably heading to the lobby to regroup and plan their next move. About 20 minutes later, they returned, now accompanied by a building security officer who seemed to be explaining something that made my mother throw her hands up in frustration. My father's posture stiffened, that familiar, rigid stance he takes whenever his plans meet resistance. His usual commanding air fell flat against the security professional who was simply enforcing the rules. Just as they looked ready to leave, the apartment door swung open and Derek appeared, dressed casually for the weekend and holding a coffee mug. Even without sound, their surprise was obvious. Their bodies recoiling as if shocked, Derek stayed calm, likely explaining his legal right to be there, while my family struggled to process this unexpected reality. My mother's hand flew to her chest in her classic gesture of distress. My father leaned forward aggressively until the security officer stepped in to create space. Rachel stood frozen, her face shifting from confusion to outrage as the truth sank in. The whole confrontation lasted less than 5 minutes before the officer escorted them back toward the elevator. My father's stiff posture and my mother's animated gestures spoke volumes, emotions barely held in check. As they vanished from the camera's view, I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath, watching it all unfold. Almost immediately, my phone blew up with notifications. Voicemails from my father threatened everything from calling the police for an unauthorized occupant to showing up at my workplace Monday if I didn't respond right away. My mother's texts escalated from confused to accusatory. "How could you do this to your sister? We raised you better than this." Rachel's messages were the most intense, an unrelenting stream of all-caps attacks questioning my character, loyalty, and decency. I forwarded the worst to my friend Megan, who had offered to keep an eye on things in case legal help became necessary. "Your family is losing it," she messaged back after reading them. "But you're absolutely within your rights. Stay strong." Around 1 p.m., Derek called to fill me in on what happened firsthand. "Your dad tried to claim they had your permission to come in," he said. "When I showed them the sublease, he insisted it must be fake. The security guy had to remind him that trying to enter without authorization could mean police involvement." He laughed softly. "They left when your dad realized he was making a scene in front of the neighbors. Your mom said they'd confront you about this betrayal." I thanked Derek for handling it so professionally and asked if he was still comfortable with our arrangement given the drama. "Absolutely," he said. "Your family's chaos doesn't change our deal. Your home is secure." By early evening, the nonstop calls and texts had slowed, replaced by a more tactical approach. My aunt called, clearly roped in as a mediator, her voice gentle but practiced. "How everyone's worried about you, Olivia. This isn't like you to shut out your family when they need you." I let the voicemail play but didn't call back, recognizing the old tactic. using extended family to pressure me when direct methods fail. Dad's last message of the day came at 10:30 p.m., his voice calm but dripping with anger. Your mother is distraught. Rachel has nowhere else to go. You've made your point. This childish stunt ends now. Call us in the morning to arrange access. Preparing for bed in my quiet hotel room, I felt an unexpected peace despite the day's chaos. For the first time, I'd set a boundary and stood firm against the tidal wave of family pressure. The guilt and anxiety lingered, the familiar companions of years of emotional conditioning, but alongside them bloomed something new and fragile: pride in my strength and certainty that I deserved basic respect. Being consulted about my own home tomorrow promised more confrontation as my family adjusted to this new reality. But tonight, I allowed myself to accept a simple truth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to break free from unhealthy patterns, even when that disruption brings discomfort. Saying no when yes means sacrificing your self-respect is the first step toward healthier relationships. Sunday morning dawned with a strange quiet, like the calm after a storm. I checked my security feed first, relieved to see no unexpected visitors had tried to return overnight. My phone had fewer messages than I expected. Maybe my family was regrouping to plan their next move. The first text came from Rachel at 7:15 a.m., her tone dramatically softer than the day before. I don't understand why you're doing this to me. I have nowhere else to go. Is this because of that time I borrowed your sweater in high school and stretched it? I said I was sorry. The attempt to minimize the situation by dredging up some trivial old grievance instead of facing the real boundary violation was so typical of our family dynamics. I almost laughed through the tension. I didn't respond, knowing it was the first move in the familiar dance of deflection and guilt. By mid-morning, my mother shifted from anger to bargaining, her voicemail suggesting compromises that still ignored my autonomy. Maybe Rachel could just stay 2 weeks while she finds another place. We'd pay you some rent if that's what this is about. Family helps family, Olivia. The implication that my boundary was about money, not respect for my space and independence, showed how little she understood. Dad's communication changed too, from demands to calculated reason. I get that you think we should have talked more. That's fair. Let's sit down like adults and find a solution that helps Rachel while respecting your concerns. His measured tone couldn't hide the assumption that the outcome would still be Rachel moving in, just with my consent tacked on to legitimize it. Around noon, I got a surprising text from my brother Ethan, who had stayed unusually quiet throughout the whole conflict. Mom and Dad are freaking out, Rachel's crashing at their place, and complaining nonstop. Not sure what exactly happened, but whatever you did standing up to them, respect. His message was the first from any family member, acknowledging that my resistance might be justified, offering a small but meaningful counterweight to the overwhelming pressure from the rest. Derek kept me updated throughout the day, letting me know that building security had increased patrols on my floor after my family's confrontational behavior raised concerns. Your dad called management this morning, he said. The weekend manager told me he demanded to speak to someone about fraudulent sublease documents, but was told all your paperwork is legit and legally binding. This failed attempt to override my arrangements through official channels confirmed I'd taken the right approach, handling things by the book rather than through emotional appeals. By Sunday evening, extended family members began chiming in, clearly having received a carefully edited version of events. My grandmother called, disappointed that I wouldn't help poor Rachel in her time of need. Mom's sister emailed a long message about sibling bonds and how I'd regret this selfishness when I needed family support. I archived those messages without replying, recognizing them as the next escalation phase. Bringing in allies to increase the pressure Monday morning brought practical concerns as my father sent a terse message about Rachel's furniture, apparently sitting in a rented moving truck, accruing daily fees. This is costing us money now. What do you suggest we do with your sister's belongings? This was the closest they'd come to admitting their original plan had failed, and they were considering alternatives. I didn't respond right away, letting the reality of their presumptuous actions settle without my input. By Monday afternoon, my mother switched back to emotional appeals, sending a photo of Rachel looking forlorn among boxes in my parents' living room with the caption, "This is what your stubbornness caused." It was a transparent attempt to shift blame for their failed plan onto me. I muted the conversation and spent the evening researching family therapists nearby, realizing that if any healthy relationship was salvageable, professional help would be essential. Tuesday brought the first real sign of adjustment as my father's tone shifted from demands to pragmatism. "We're looking at apartments for Rachel. Let us know when you're ready to discuss what happened." Though there was no apology or admission of overstepping, this shift to finding Rachel alternate housing was the first tangible recognition that my boundary was being acknowledged, if not yet fully respected. That evening, I sent a careful response, the first direct communication since the confrontation. "I'm glad you're helping Rachel find her own place. I'll be back Friday and willing to meet and talk Saturday afternoon." The message was intentionally neutral, offering space for dialogue without apologizing or emotionally engaging with their accusations. Wednesday and Thursday passed with minimal contact, indicating my family was processing things their way. Rachel sent one request to store a few boxes in my apartment until she found a place, which I politely declined, standing firm on the boundary I'd set. By Friday morning, checking out of my hotel, I felt ready to re-engage with my family from a place of strength. The past week had been tough, but transformative, forcing us all to face long, unquestioned patterns. Driving back to the city, I knew the upcoming conversation would be difficult but necessary, the first step toward rebuilding on healthier terms or accepting some distance to protect my hard-won independence. Either way, I was entering as a full adult with legitimate rights and boundaries, not the perpetual accommodating daughter whose needs always came last. That shift in mindset was the true victory in this painful but vital confrontation. Saturday afternoon arrived with golden autumn sunlight flooding the quiet coffee shop I'd picked as neutral ground for our family meeting, perfectly placed between my apartment and my parents' house. I showed up 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table with a clear view of the entrance and enough privacy for what I knew would be a delicate conversation. Ordering a cappuccino gave me a moment to steady my nerves and review my talking points, determined to stay calm and clear no matter how my family approached things. Mom arrived first, 5 minutes early as usual, her face carefully composed, but rapid blinking betraying her nerves. She moved to hug me, but hesitated when I offered my hand instead. A small but firm boundary set from the start. Dad and Rachel arrived together moments later. Dad wore his usual stern expression, reserved for tough talks, while Rachel's eyes were red-rimmed from tears or sleeplessness. An awkward silence settled as they took their seats, the familiar family dynamic momentarily unsettled by the unprecedented situation. Dad cleared his throat, taking his usual role as conversation leader. "Well, Olivia, I think you owe us all an explanation for your behavior last weekend." The framing was predictable, painting me as the offender despite their actions, and I recognized it as the opening move. "Actually," I replied, keeping my voice steady, "I think we need to talk about why you all made plans for my apartment without consulting me first." My directness clearly caught them off guard. Mom's eyebrows shot up and Dad's mouth tightened at the corners. Rachel shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in stirring her untouched coffee. "We were just trying to help your sister," Mom began, her voice slipping into the gentle reproach that had smoothed over many family conflicts before. "You have that extra room sitting empty, while Rachel needed a place to stay. Family helps family." The familiar refrain hung between us, a phrase I'd heard countless times when sacrifices were expected of me, but rarely when I needed support. I acknowledged, "I understand Rachel needs help, but deciding she would move into my home without asking me first isn't help. It's an invasion of my space and a disregard for my autonomy." My father leaned forward, his patience clearly thinning. "This melodramatic language isn't helpful, Olivia. Invasion? Autonomy? We're talking about your sister needing temporary housing, not a philosophical debate about personal boundaries." His dismissal of my concerns as exaggeration was a tactic that had silenced me before, but this time I was ready. "It is about boundaries, Dad, healthy ones. Would you have made these arrangements for Rachel to move into Ethan's apartment without asking him first? The question hit home. My father leaned back, clearly considering. My mother jumped in quickly. That's different. Ethan's situation is different. The vague justification revealed the double standard I'd lived with for years. Different? How? I pressed gently. Because you respect his space and decisions in a way you don't respect mine. Rachel finally spoke, her voice wavering between defensiveness and confusion. I didn't know they hadn't talked to you first. They told me you were fine with the arrangement. Her words shifted the conversation, showing my parents had misled not just me, but also Rachel about how much communication had actually happened. My mother flushed slightly and looked down at her coffee. We were going to discuss the details with you, but we knew you'd be agreeable once you understood Rachel's situation. That presumption hung in the air, impossible to ignore. That's exactly the problem, I said softly. You didn't talk to me because you assumed I'd say yes, regardless of my needs or circumstances. You treated my home like community property, not my personal space. My father opened his mouth but paused, seemingly considering my words with unexpected care. The silence stretched before he finally spoke in a less combative tone. Perhaps we should have approached this differently. Your living situation is your own business, and we overstepped. That reluctant acknowledgement was more than I'd expected, and I felt a tightness in my chest ease slightly. My mother's face remained troubled, torn between her desire for family harmony and the disruption to old patterns. We just want what's best for both our girls, she said, reaching toward me again. You've always been so independent. Sometimes we forget to check if you need your space. The qualifier sometimes understated decades of boundary violations, but I recognized it as the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get. Rachel glanced between our parents, and then at me, her expression more genuine than I'd seen in years. I'm sorry, Liv. I should have called you directly instead of assuming everything was arranged. That was really inconsiderate. Her unqualified apology surprised me most of all. Thank you for saying that, I replied sincerely. I would have been happy to help you find solutions if I'd been approached respectfully. The conversation then shifted from accusation to tentative problem-solving. My father mentioned several apartments they'd found for Rachel, more affordable than she'd initially wanted, but within her budget with some parental help. My mother suggested a family gathering to help Rachel move once she had a place, carefully adding, if everyone's available. With a meaningful glance at me, as the tension eased, I brought up my final prepared point, the one I'd been most nervous about. Going forward, I need certain boundaries, respected direct communication, not assumptions. Consulting me about decisions affecting my life before they're made, and respecting my right to say no without being made to feel selfish or difficult. My father nodded slowly, the businessman in him recognizing reasonable terms, even if the father in him struggled with the shifting dynamic. Fair enough. We'll try to be more mindful. My mother reached across the table, not to touch me, but to place her hand near mine, a gesture of connection without presumption. We love you, Olivia. Sometimes we get caught up managing everything and forget you're an adult with your own life. As we prepared to leave, with tentative plans to help Rachel look at apartments the following weekend, I felt exhausted yet cautiously optimistic. The conversation hadn't solved everything. Decades of family patterns couldn't be undone in one meeting, but it had set a precedent for more respectful interaction that I was determined to uphold. Rachel lingered as our parents headed to their car, gently catching my arm. I really am sorry, she said, her voice softer and more sincere than her usual performative contrition. And I'm kind of impressed, actually. I've never seen anyone stand up to Mom and Dad like that. Her recognition of what I'd done offered unexpected validation. It wasn't easy, I admitted, but it was necessary for all of us. Watching them drive away, I felt lighter than I had in weeks, not because all problems were solved, but because I had finally found my voice in a family conversation that had long excluded it. Returning to my apartment after Derek's sublease ended felt like coming home to a space truly my own, in a way it never had before. The furniture and decorations were exactly where I'd left them, but something fundamental had changed in my relationship with the sanctuary I'd created. Standing alone in the living room that first evening, I ran my hand along the bookshelf my father had once casually suggested, clearing for Rachel's things, appreciating how each object represented choices I'd made for myself, rather than accommodations for others' expectations. The week following our coffee shop conversation brought subtle but meaningful changes in how my family communicated. My mother called, rather than texted about family matters, and her carefully chosen words were framed as requests, rather than assumptions. "We're helping Rachel look at apartments on Saturday if you'd like to join us," she offered, her tentative phrasing acknowledging my right to say no without judgment. My father's communication stayed somewhat distant, but noticeably more respectful, his usual commanding directives replaced by straightforward updates that didn't expect a response. Rachel surprised me the most. She reached out to suggest lunch, just the two of us sisters, with a level of openness I hadn't seen from her since we were kids. Over that meal, she shared parts of her perspective I'd never heard before, including her own struggles with our parents' expectations and her sincere belief that I had willingly agreed to share my apartment. "They always made it sound like you were happy to help. Eager, even," she said, picking at her salad. "I never questioned it because it fit the story they always told about you being the responsible, accommodating one." Her words revealed how deeply our parents had shaped the way we saw each other, casting us into complementary roles that stopped real connection. "I'm trying to be more independent," she admitted. "Seeing you stand your ground made me realize how much I've let them manage everything in my life." That conversation marked the start of a more honest relationship between us, based on direct communication rather than the roles our parents assigned. Rebuilding family dynamics on healthier terms wasn't without setbacks. My mother sometimes slipped back into old habits, commenting on how my new attitude complicated family plans. My father occasionally responded to my boundaries with cold distance, his discomfort with the shifting power dynamic showing in his reluctance to engage openly. The family dinner the following month had tense moments. Decades of familiar roles weren't easy to abandon, even with conscious effort. Still, amid those challenges, my confidence grew each time I calmly but firmly held my ground. The paralyzing guilt that once accompanied speaking up eased a little. When my mother called asking me to host Thanksgiving despite my earlier refusal, I was able to say no without the hours of anxious justification that would have once followed. "That doesn't work for me this year," I said simply, offering instead to bring side dishes for whoever hosted, standing firm in my choice. The brief pause before her acceptance felt like a small but meaningful victory. Rachel found an apartment in early December, a modest one-bedroom closer to work than she'd previously considered. I helped her move in, our teamwork free of the tension that had marked so many past interactions. As we arranged her furniture, she confided she'd started therapy, partly inspired by watching me set boundaries. "I need to figure out who I am beyond the artistic, emotional daughter who always needs rescuing," she said as we put together her bookshelf. "Aunt, I want to be someone who can handle her own life." Her vulnerability in that moment built a bridge between us stronger than any childhood connection, founded on mutual respect instead of assigned family roles. The holiday season brought the biggest test of our family's evolving dynamic. At Christmas dinner at my parents' house, my mother had called ahead to ask what dish I'd bring, instead of simply assigning one. A small but meaningful nod to my adult autonomy. My father greeted me warmly for the first time since the confrontation, his gradual acceptance of the new family balance clear in his genuine questions about my work and plans for the new year. As we exchanged gifts and shared stories, subtle shifts were noticeable. My parents consulting each other instead of making decisions alone, Rachel gently refusing my mother's unsolicited career advice, and me comfortably voicing opinions that didn't always align with family consensus. The evening wasn't perfect. Old habits surfaced now and then, before being consciously redirected. But it marked real progress toward healthier relationships. Driving home that night, I reflected on the month's journey, from the family dinner, where they assigned Rachel to my apartment, to this gathering where boundaries were finally being acknowledged, if not fully respected. Healing family relationships distorted by unhealthy patterns would be ongoing, requiring vigilance and occasional boundary reinforcement. Yet the most fundamental shift was not just how my family treated me, but how I saw myself in relation to them. I'd learned standing up for myself didn't mean cutting ties or constant conflict, but creating space for authentic connection based on respect rather than roles and unexamined expectations. Unlocking my apartment door, returning to the space I'd fought to protect, I felt grateful, not just for these walls and sanctuary, but for the stronger sense of self I'd found within them. The deepest lesson from this painful family confrontation wasn't about property or living arrangements, but this: healthy relationships need both love and boundaries, care and respect. By finally saying no to a boundary violation I once silently accepted, I opened the door to saying yes to a more genuine family connection, one built on who we truly are, not who we're expected to be. Have you ever had to stand up to your family to protect your boundaries? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest people to set boundaries with are the ones we love most. But as I've learned, it's often the healthiest thing we can do for ourselves and our relationships. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you want more stories about navigating complex family dynamics and personal growth. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential for building authentic relationships that can truly stand the test of time.